Because he lived in England, most people assume that Shackleton was English. That was not so. Shackleton was actually born in Ireland. In fact, he was brought up in Ireland until about the age of 10, when his family moved to the suburbs of London. I suppose you might say that Shackleton was an immigrant of sorts, and like most immigrants, he kind of occupied this middle ground, like Jacob Marley or the ghost of Hamlet's father. He was not properly of one world or the other. In fact, throughout his life, he never completely lost his Irish accent. On the occasions he went back to Ireland, they would only really have heard the Englishisms that he had picked up, whereas back in England, they would only have heard the Irishisms that he would have retained. I suppose, and here I'm going out on a limb a bit, I suppose if you were to ask Shackleton where his, let's say, spiritual bed was located, he would have scratched his head and tugged on his old chin for a moment and then replied, the high latitudes of the southern hemisphere, or perhaps even South Georgia, one of the sub-Antarctic islands where Shackleton achieved one of his greatest feats, if you like, and where in fact he died and was buried. But all that was speculation, because if you're considering Shackleton's roots, the one thing you can say for certain is that it all began right here. This is Kilkea House. We're in County Kildare, about 30 miles from Dublin, and here, in this very house, was where, on the 15th of February 1894, Ernest Henry Shackleton was born. Shackleton's father, Henry, was a tenant farmer, and this was his farmhouse. Shackleton was one of 10 children. He was the second oldest. They were reasonably well-to-do. As far as we know, it was a very happy family, a loving family, a religious family. Not many stories of Shackleton's early childhood survive, but one tells of him digging for treasure in this garden right here. For whatever reason, Henry gave up farming and they moved to Dublin, where Henry studied medicine. And when he graduated as a doctor, it was then that he moved to London. I'm in Kilkea House, and I'm with Richard Green, who is the farmer here now. This is actually the living room where the Shackleton family lived. Shackleton's father, Henry, would have sat there, his mother would probably have sat there, and Shackleton and his 7 brothers and sisters would probably all be playing right here. It sends shivers up my spine. Richard, however, has just shown me something which is so special, and I want to share it with you now. Richard, could you explain to me what you just
So this is a map of the farm done at the time, and you can see Kilkea Upper is the name of the townland, and Mr. Henry Shackleton is, of course, Sir Ernest's father.
It's right there.
Yeah.
Henry Shackleton.
And it shows all the fields, and you'll notice that each field has 2 measurements on it. One being the statute acre and one being Irish acres, which is just an idiosyncrasy of Ireland, where we have Irish acres and statute acres. So, but basically the farm is very similar to that time. When the Shackleton family left here in 1880, they would have had a clearance sale of all their the hay and straw and the cattle on the farm. So it was held on the 6th of August 1880 by order of Henry Shackleton. And there's first and second crop hay, there's meadow, and then there is here on the left-hand side of I'm holding here, the list of the stock: 15 excellent dairy cows, 9 year-and-a-half-old bullocks, 4 yearling bullocks, 5 weanling bullocks and calves. Then it goes on to shorthorn bulls, sheep, and then all the farm implements.
Richard, I've just one question to ask you. Why do you think Henry gave up farming?
Well, I suppose, you know, they rented the farm from the Duke of Leinster, which is the castle right beside us here. So they rented the farm from them. They rented it from 1870 to 1880. And there's the ups and downs of farming, and perhaps things weren't going well, and they just decided to change career. So as you say, Henry Shackleton then became a doctor in Dublin, and then subsequently they moved to England.
Can we just go upstairs and have a look to see where Shackleton was born?
I'd love to.
I'll show you what. But this is the room. It's on the right here.
This was the room where Shackleton was born?
Yes.
Wow, this is the Holy of
It looks
Holies,
very-
the Sanctum Sanctorum.
This window was there, and so was that one.
So let's see,
But
15th of February, 1874, right?
Yes.
Boy, have I done my homework.
Yeah. It's changed a lot.
Do we have any stories
These are
about...
original floorboards.
Really? You would have actually trodden
I
these?
think we had to cut them for
Yeah.
put in central heating 42 years ago. But they're all
This is
the
incredible.
original.
Tony, thank you so
Not
much.
at all.
I'm actually in the room where Shackleton was born. It's an incredible feeling. I actually kind of feel the breath of Shackleton himself on the back of my neck. I'm at Sandefjord, an old whaling centre on the coast of Norway. And right beneath this nondescript car park here was once situated the renowned Framnes shipyard. From the trees and the hills up there, they fashioned the best ice ships in the world. And now follow me. I want to show you something. Right here is where they made their most famous ship, the Polaris, better known as Shackleton's Endurance. And it's all recorded on this plaque. And here you see the Endurance being built in 1912. And at this point, I have to come clean. I haven't the least notion of what any of this means. It's in Norwegian. But if this were my rock and that my plaque, this is what I would say. I would say right here was built the greatest polar ice ship of them all, the Endurance. She carried 28 men, champions all, to the very ends of the earth and into the grinding ice of the Weddell Sea, into what Shackleton himself called the worst portion of the worst sea on earth. She became icebound, she was crushed, she sank, and now she sits in the Stygian darkness of the Antarctic abyss, nibbled by fish and waiting to be found. I want to show you something very, very special. I'm in the storage rooms of the Norway National Maritime Museum. This is the part of the museum that none of the public ever gets to see. But right here, this is the finest and most accurate model of the Endurance in existence. And more than that, it was actually made by the shipwrights of the Framnes shipyard at Sandefjord, where the Endurance, then known as the Polaris, was launched in 1912. Wow, look at the detail and And look at those eye-sweet lines. You can tell at a glance that this is no kit model. This was made by somebody who understood ships. This was somebody who lived and breathed wooden ship construction. It's so authentic. Shackleton, for instance, this is the bridge right here, and that's where the great man would have stood. Worsley, Hudson, Greenstreet, they would have been right there, the ship's officers, and they would have been shouting the instructions back to the wheelsman, the man at the helm, right here in the well deck aft. Because you have to remember, the guy who was steering, he could not see the leads ahead of the ship. He depended on getting instructions from the bridge.
I'm at Scott Polar Research Institute in Cambridge. It's a renowned centre for Arctic and Antarctic studies. It was founded soon after World War I by some of the scientists who actually went south with both Scott and Shackleton. It contains a library, it contains an archive, and it contains a museum. Everything which I like best. And it's all under one roof. In my world, things just don't get better. So here I am in the museum. It may not be the biggest polar museum in the world, but it's certainly the best. And to my mind, of all the objects in their collection, this is the most important. What is it? It's called a sextant. And before the days of GPS, this is what you used to work out your position on the globe. The big problem for the Antarctic explorers of old was knowing where they were. Imagine it. You're this tiny little dot, all alone on this vast, white, hostile continent where everything kind of looks the same. You've really got to know where you are all the time, and you especially have to know where you are in order to work out where you are going. It's as fundamental as that. Basically, you use the sextant to measure the angle between the horizon and the sun, or some other astronomical body. And once you have that angle, together with the time it was taking, you can work out, or you can plot your position or your latitude and longitude onto a map or a chart. Now, the sextant is a remarkably accurate instrument, but, and this is the important bit, it has to be in the right hands. It has to be in the hands of an experienced, skilled navigator, which is why they used to say that navigation was 50% science and 50% art. Now, fortunately, Shackleton had with him an absolute master navigator. His name was Frank Worsley, and he was the captain of the Endurance, and this was his sextant. And now, I want to show you something special, something that belongs to me. It's this. This is a photograph of Frank Worsley, the captain of the Endurance. For many years, this picture hung in a bar in the Falkland Islands, and somehow or another it was acquired by my father, and I inherited it from my father. I love this photograph. Good-looking guy, isn't he? And I just love that roll collar sweater he's wearing. Great stuff. And this photograph, by the way, was taken on the Endurance. Okay, let's get back to the sextant. Now, those of you who know the Shackleton story will remember how Shackleton got his men off the ice and to a nasty little rock called Elephant Island. But the problem was, once he got to Elephant Island, he soon realized that if they stayed there, they will all die. So he decided to set out in one of his boats called the James Caird for the much bigger island of South Georgia, where he knew there was a whaling station. The problem was South Georgia was almost 800 miles away and across some of the worst seas in the world. So naturally, he took with him his master navigator, Frank Worsley. And sure enough, thanks to Worsley, 2 weeks later, they arrived at South Georgia. And eventually, because of that, all the men were rescued. Now, this, believe it or not, was the very sextant which Worsley used to make his crossing to South Georgia. You might say that it's thanks to this instrument here that all Shackleton's men survived. I'm in the archives of the Scott Polar Research Institute, where over the years I've spent many wonderful days. But what I want to show you now is what is probably the most treasured item in their collection. It's Shackleton's diary, and here it is. It's not much to look at, but this is the actual diary which Shackleton had with him on the Endurance and afterwards on the ice. I find it incredibly moving. I mean, the cover's gone, completely gone. This is all that is left of the cover. It has disintegrated out of existence. It's incredible. And here you have the inside cover page. And even this, you see, is all dog-eared. It's, you know, it's stained with sealed blubber and soot from oil lamps, and yeah, it's a bit whiffy, but it's just so, I don't know, it just transports me right back to Shackleton. And you see on this page here, he's listed all the names of the people of the team. All 28 names are here, starting with himself: EHS, Wild, Hudson, Vincent, McCarthy, and so on. They're all there. And turn the page, and okay, well, here it gets a little bit more banal. Here is just a list of, I don't know, shipboard items or something. The first word is sanitary, the next word is flushing. Then we have needles, bashing, fashion, paper, automatic, and the last word is tin opener. If this book could speak, just think of the stories it could tell. You know, it pains me to say it, but Shackleton wasn't one of the world's great diarists. His descriptions are sketchy at best, and he never lets you into his head. You never know what he's thinking. And then you get page after page of this. Look at this. Nothing doing much. Fine weather. Turn the page. What have you got? Nothing doing. Look at the next page. Oh, look at it again. Nothing doing. You know, it just goes on and on like that. And when you look at the other diarists and look at these same pages, you find out that there is, in fact, a lot doing, but you wouldn't know it from Shackleton's diaries. Now, we haven't got time to look at all the diary, obviously. So what I want to do is concentrate on just one day, the day that the Endurance sank. Many of you are already familiar with the Endurance story, and you'll remember how when the ice tore aside the rudder, that was the moment when all the water poured in and Shackleton realized that there was nothing more that they could do, and he abandoned the Endurance. At that point, they all went to live on the ice. It was another 25 days before the Endurance sank, and when she finally went under, it was a bit like the sinking of the Titanic, which happened just 3 years before. You remember how the stern of the Titanic rose in the air and then she slid under? So it was with the Endurance. Up she went,
Down she went, gone in one gulp, and Shackleton saw it all. And this is what he had to say. Let's see. We've got the date, Sunday, 21st November 1915, and he begins. She went today. I was standing by Hurley's sledge at 4:50 p.m. I saw the funnel dip behind a hummock. A hummock's like a ridge of ice. I ran up to the lookout. At 5 p.m. she went down by the head. That means she went down bow first. The stern, the cause of all the trouble, was the last to go under the water. I cannot write about it anymore. Obviously, this was just such an emotional moment for Shackleton. He just could not describe what happened in detail. It was just tearing at him. So at this point, it gets a little bit interesting, because then he sort of goes into all sorts of other stuff. For instance, after the loss of his ship, he suddenly starts talking about what the icebergs are doing and how they're all changing position. And then he starts to talk about a seal that came in. Here it is. A seal came into the camp this morning. Wild killed it with one shot. And then he talks a bit about the weather. In other words, it's all just what? It's just chit-chat, because he can't deal with all the emotional burden that he's got at that moment because of losing his ship, his beloved ship, the Endurance. It had gone. Yeah, there. The activities of the polar explorers have inspired some really great art, but one of my favourite pieces is the domed ceiling painting of Antarctica right above my head. I just love it. You can make out the Weddell Sea where we are going, and if you step in a little closer, you can actually see the Endurance being swallowed up by the pack. You can almost smell the ice and feel the cold.